Hi, this is Vanessa Gorman, and today's lesson is on Greek adverbs. We've already talked about sentence adverbs, which are essentially particles. They are technically a subdivision of adverbs, but now I want to talk about things that you and I would more readily recognize as adverbs, whether in Greek or in English. So we're thinking about words like soon or afterwards, thus, there, well, now, thereupon. Often words translated with the ly form, like warmly or hostilely or quickly. This is how we transform an adjective into an adverb as a rule. In English, you'll see grammar books say things like adverbs are used to modify a verb, an adjective, a clause, or another adverb. Anything essentially except nouns and pronouns, which are modified by adjectives. That's English. In Greek, the fact is adverbs can act as a modifier for almost anything. Let me just review some things we've already seen, which is many things that function in the sentence as adverbs are not adverbs by part of speech. Remember way back at the beginning when we were doing Grammar 101, I talked about how when you make dependency trees, there's a big difference between the part of speech and the relation. And adverb happens to be the only category that falls in both. That is to say, if the part of speech is noun, the relation is never noun. It's either subject or object or something like that. Whereas adverb occurs in both, the category adverb occurs in both of these labels, both relation and part of speech. Now, that doesn't mean every adverb by part of speech is an adverb by relation. And as we've already seen, some things that are not adverbs by part of speech act adverbially in the sentence. What am I talking about? I'm talking about, for example, prepositional phrases are often acting adverbially, right? Metadetauta, after these things or afterwards, right? You could use just an adverb that means afterwards, but often they'll use some kind of prepositional phrase. We do that in English as well. Because we have inflection, a lot of nouns and adjectives in the oblique cases act adverbially if they are not a necessary argument of the verb. So they are not subject or object in dependency syntax labeling. If they are not necessary, then they are adverbial. The example I give here is on the next day. This is a noun clause that is acting as the dative of time when. Likewise, I can say a genitive of comparison. Something is in the genitive being compared, it's going to act adverbially in the sentence. So we have these, and also don't forget we have the catch-all adverbial accusative. So you can take an adjective, throw it in the accusative case, usually singular, sometimes plural, without any kind of preposition at all, and you get yourself an adverb, and especially you put it in the neuter accusative. So then they fled into the Pontus husteron, which comes from husteros, meaning later, right? It becomes here an adverb, later into Athens. Okay? So we've got various ways we can already make things adverbially in a sentence. But what about the true adverbs themselves? Well, what distinguishes them from all of these things? Well, first off, adverbs as a rule are not inflected. That is, there's one form and one form only of the positive. There's going to be comparative and superlative, so you can have something that is well, more well, or most well. But the adverb itself isn't going to change. In fact, the normal rule is you take any three ending adjective or two ending adjective, knock off the os, and add an omega sigma, and you have yourself an adverb, and then it doesn't decline. This is the form you'll always see. So kalos, you knock off the omicron sigma, add on an omega sigma, you go from good, the adjective, to well, the adverb. Unjust, the adjective, to adikos, unjustly, the adverb. Polemios, hostile, someone who is hostile, to polemios, hostily. Likewise, you can do the same thing with demonstratives, and these are very, very common. So allos, another or other. If you turn it into the adverb, you get otherwise. You know, he acted otherwise. That's not an uncommon word. Hutos, you change it to the adverb, and sometimes it just drops the sigma too, by the way. Sometimes it's just huto. Very, very common word meaning thus, therefore. Hoda, remember that this is the article plus the suffix de. Well, you change that article ho to an omega. So hoda, thus, is another way of saying thus. So there's various ways of saying thus. So let me show you a few examples. So here's a very basic sentence. Ukai kalos epraxen. Now you can look at the sentence and you find your verb, epraxen. Okay, they did. So we hang that as the predicate. Then we have ukai kalos. What do we do with all that? Well, kalos as an adjective means good. So kalos as an adverb means well. So they acted well. And that is an adverb. It's describing how the action is going on. Except they didn't act well. Ook is in here. It's changed to ooks in front of the kappa. So ooks means not. So they behaved not well. And that is an aux z, if you'll remember, an emphasizing particle. And then kai acts here as the aux y, connecting it to the sentence before. So, and they didn't act well, is how you would translate that sentence. Likewise, kai hutos exelthon. Exelthon is your verb, so we hang it as the predicate. It comes from erkomai, right? It's the aorist from erkomai, except it has ek on the front. So erkomai means to come, ek means out of, so come out. Kai is your same old sentence adverb we had in the first sentence here. And then hutos as an adjective means that man, and here it just means thus, in this way it happens. So in this way they came out, so thus they came out. Adikos ephugon paraton nomon. Now remember, paraton nomon, para with the word nomon in the accusative means contrary to. The verb is ephugon, and by now you probably recognize that as they fled. So they fled contrary to the law. Contrary to the law is a preposition acting adverbially here. But that's not the only thing going on. We also have adikos. You see the omega sigma and you say, aha, that is an adverb as well. And you know by now that adikos, the adjective, means not just. Alpha privative plus dikos, just. And so you turn that into an adverb, unjustly. And so they fled unjustly, contrary to the law. Hoidetsenoi kakos tous politas exon. Okay, your verb is at the end, exon, and that should be pretty familiar to you too by now. They had or held. The subject is the nominative. You're looking for a nominative. You see it with hoi tsenoi. The strangers or the guest friends or the foreigners, however you want to translate it in this context. We see kakos, which you know is going to be an adverb by the ending. And you see tous politas. You say to yourself, aha, tous, it's an accusative plural, masculine, the citizens. So tsenoi has to be the subject, politas has to be the citizens. The strangers, the foreigners, held the citizens. Now that sounds odd, doesn't it? Why? What are they holding them in prison or what? Well, there's an idiom in Greek. You use the word echo with an adverb, and it means to treat in a certain way. So what it's saying actually is they treated the citizens badly. They had them badly. They had them in a bad state. And you'll see this fairly often, some kind of idioms like this. We have idioms in English all the time. So these are just basic garden variety adverbs like hajos and adijos. There's some particular endings that you can look out for because they're old and they occur fairly often, and I'm calling them adverbial place suffixes, which is to say we get these signs of motion or place. If you get a kind of a place word with an iota or a theta iota or a sigma iota on the end, it denotes place where. It's actually kind of a form of the dative. If you get then on the ending, it denotes from which, whence, you would say in English. Or if you put desa or ze on the ending, it means toward which. So obviously these are comparable to the dative of place, the genitive of place, and the accusative of place, but they're used adverbially. So for example, you take the word house, ho oikos, right? That's a noun. It has a corresponding adjective, oikaios, that means domestic, plain old three-ending adjective. But if you take the stem of that and you add these place suffixes, you get adverbs. Oikoi, which means at home. It's basically what's left of the locative case, place where. Oikothen, from home, or oikada, towards home. And that one is in bold with a asterisk because it's going to be on your most common adverb list. You can do the same thing with place names, especially we see it with Athens, since we have so many Athenian writers. So Athenae is the city of Athens in the plural feminine. That's how it always occurs. It's a plural feminine. The ethnic adjective and noun from it is Athenaios. If you add these place suffixes, you get Athenasen, at Athens, Athenazen, from Athens, and Athenadze, to Athens. You can do the same thing with some of the demonstratives, like that, ekainos, that becomes ekai, there, or then. These can be place or also temporal to some extent, but usually these are place. Ekaisen, from there, and ekaisa, to there. Now, ekai and ekaisen are very common. They're going to be on your list, so you'll see these fairly often. Hutos as well. Remember the stem is toot or tout, so we get entautha, there or then, and this can be either temporal or spatial. Entha, there or then, and then entoithen, thereupon, thence, from there. Again, you see 4 of these 6 forms are very, very common, so you're going to see them a lot. So, for example, right, op el the, he went away, or he sailed, well, went away. And then we have this oikada, which you know by now means homewards. So he went away homewards. So we have the predicate and we have the adverb. And when you see an adverb hanging on a verb, you just translate it like a regular adverb for the most part. En toithen, we've already seen this. They made an ecclesia, they made an assembly then or thereupon. See, you could even say there, depending on what's being stressed in the context. If we're stressing the location, then you say there. If you're stressing the temporal sequence, then you say then or thereupon. Okay, here we have ekaithen, from there. So now we have a series of adverbs. You haven't seen euthus yet. You're going to. Euthus means immediately. So you see the verb, the main verb, they sailed, right? So they sailed from there, ekaithen, immediately, Athenadza, to Athens. And so you see we've got this sentence where you've got 3 adverbs all hanging on the verb, and that's perfectly fine. From there, immediately they sailed to Athens. Okay? Hoto de tuta hoi stratiotai ekaithen echorun. All right, we start with a verb as always. Echorun, they withdrew, right? Who's withdrawing? Hoi stratiotai, then is in the nominative, so we know that's the subject of the sentence, the soldiers. Then we have these adverbs. Now, tota means then, temporally. Huto, thus, and then ekaithen, from there. So we have, thus then, the soldiers withdrew from there. You see why it's kind of awkward to then try to translate the de in any way, the sentence adverb. We've already got enough adverbs piled up and we don't need to add some word. There's people out there who obsess about translating every sentence adverb with some kind of English word, and it just doesn't work all the time. It just starts sounding foolish. All right, here's a longer sentence, so let's tear it apart. Hoi de Ephesioi, the Ephesians, tropaion en tautha katastesan, kai heteron prosto choreso. So the Ephesians is in the nominative, right? And it's right at the front, so we know that's the subject. Now let's find what's going on. We see a kai later on, and we see one verb. So we see katastesan. So kathistemi means to set up, right? Histemi is to stand. Kata histemi is to set something down or set, we would say in English, set it up, like you set up a monument. And in this case, what's in the accusative case? Well, we have two things that are possible accusatives. One is the tropaion, and one is the heteron. Well, we also have a kai, so that's nice that we have things that are parallel. Then we have an tauthen in that place, there, and prosto choreso. Now, choresis is the name of a place. Pros normally means toward, right? But that's not with the dative case. That's with the accusative case. Here we have the dative. So you know it can't mean toward because dative is not place to which. If you look up pros in the lexicon with the dative, it'll say one of its meanings is nearby. So nearby works. So nearby choresos. So the Ephesians set up, let's just take it in order. The Ephesians, tropaion is just what it looks like, a trophy. The Ephesians set up there a trophy. That sounds good. That makes sense. It fits the grammar. It fits the syntax. And heteron, which means another. Now, it could be a masculine accusative singular, or it could be a neuter accusative singular or nominative singular. We know it's not nominative. So they set up, there's no second verb for it, so you have to repeat the first verb. And they set up another. So clearly it's another neuter tropaion. The tropaion here is a neuter, and so heteron is saying another trophy. So we're just eliding the word tropaion in the second half of the sentence, just like we're eliding the verb in the second half of the sentence. So the Ephesians set up a trophy there and another one near choresis. Now, to make a tree of this sentence, we need to repeat the verb, because if I don't repeat the verb, then I have to hang tropaion and tauthen, heteron, and pros all on one verb, and then we have confusion. We don't know what the two sides of the sentence are. You have to have a verb to join these two, so you repeat the verb. Now, technically, I could have repeated the tropaion as well, right? Because we're talking about another trophy, but I don't need to, because heteron tells us just fine. I mean, an adjective, there's a gray line between adjectives and nouns. So there's no reason to repeat an unnecessary word. If you need it for the structure of the sentence, I put it in. If you don't, I don't. So there you have this nice sentence all laid out for you. And if you go to read it from the tree, you can see, okay, here's the subject, the Ephesians, has two verbs to set up. One is setting up a trophy. The other one is setting up another. This is setting it up there, and this is setting it up near choresis. So use the trees to help you read the sentences. Now, of course, the most common adverbs are irregular. That's always the case, right? I've pulled the 23 that occur ignoring the ones that end with omega sigma because that's a different category. I've pulled the ones that occur more than 20 times, and you see they're used fairly often. A lot of these are used, more than 50 times. The ones in red we've already talked about, so that reduces it down by 6. And then I put Malista and Malone in blue. We're going to talk about them more in a couple of chapters, but essentially what we have is we have this word mala, which means very, and then you have the comparative more very, or just more, malone, and then you have the superlative version, the most very, or especially. So they're just comparative and superlative forms of mala, and we're going to talk about comparatives and superlatives in a couple of chapters. But these are used very commonly depending on what author you're looking at. And so I just wanted to stick them in there and point this out. Otherwise, you have a lot of typically short words that don't necessarily have good cognates for you to help you remember them. I always hama at the same time. You'll get coordinated phrases. So at the same time he did this, and at the same time they did that. So, and those get labeled as auxes occasionally because of this. This is again, agus is near, and you typically are near of something in the genitive, sometimes in the dative, but mostly genitive. Epeta then, eta yet. Eu, well, we see that a lot. This is a word we see a lot in English as well when you think of euphoria, euthanasia. Thanatos is death, so euthanasia is a good death. Talk about a euphemism, which is another word from eu. A euphemism is calling something well that isn't necessarily well. Euthus or euthu means immediately. Ede is already. Mala very. Nun now. Pollen, again, we get the word palindrome from this, which you read it back and then you come back again, you go forward. Pota or popota, once or yet. And pota is enclitic. Pros then, before, and tota then. So pota is once or yet, tota is then. These are words that show up enough that you'll probably learn them, and if you don't, you just click on the analyzer and it will give you the form. So just to look at a few sentences now. Very, very plainly, ethuen, you know by now, is the verb thuo, to sacrifice, so he was sacrificing. Palindrome, again. So, sorry, that should be he was sacrificing again. And magically I changed it. Hoi ephoroi au, and again, you pronounce that, even though it's a diphthong, it's sort of an au sound. Eichon ton daemon. So the ephors held the people well, right? The ephors treated the people well. This is the same phrase again. Kai euthus, and now machesan, authis, lacedaemonioi kai athenaioi, and nikesan de lacedaemonioi. This is a sentence right out of the very beginning of Xenophon. And what does it say? Well, we know the verb. We've seen this a few times, even though it's not on your list. Mache, means battle or fight. Now is from sea. So they fought a sea battle in the Arist. Who's fighting it? Well, we've got a couple of nominatives, the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians. And then we have a comma and another verb, so let's leave that alone for now. So we have one verb. They fought a sea battle. The subjects are conjoined, the Lacedaemonians and Athenians. But we didn't just fight it, we fought it euthus and authis. Euthus immediately and authis again. Then we have a comma, that's the editor telling you here's the second half of a conjoined main clause, a coordinated clause. Enikesan, another verb, they won. And who's winning? In this case, it's the Lacedaemonians winning. So these two verbs are joined by the de. and the Lacedaemonians is the subject of the second half. So, and immediately the Lacedaemonians and the Athenians fought by sea again. They fought another sea battle, you could even say. And the Lacedaemonians won. Okay? Tota men effugon eis ton ponton. So effugon, they fled into the Hellespont, or sorry, into the Pontus. The Pontus is the Black Sea, and it's accusative place to which, so we're good there. What do you do with tota? Ah, it's an adverb. It means then. Men is then your sentence adverb, so it's labeled as an aux y. Then they fled to the Pontus. Engus tes Cyziku ein. Okay, let's go literally. Near of Cyzicus he was. Well, there's nothing obviously in the nominative, so let's derive it from the verb. He was, it was, she was, one of those things. What could she be? She could be of Cyzicus. That is, you could say, I am of Athens, as in a genitive of origin. But we also have Engus here, and Engus, if you'll recall, means nearby. And some adverbs take other, one could even call them arguments. Adjectives and adverbs sometimes take arguments, even though we don't label them as such. There's a school of thought that would say that it ought to be an object. But instead, because it's modifying an adverb, we call it an adverb. So he was near Cyzicus. He was nearby Cyzicus, near of Cyzicus, because engus often occurs with a genitive. One could even argue it becomes a preposition. There's a fine line between prepositions and adverbs. Just a question of how often this happens, because prepositions all begin as adverbs. So it or he was near Cyzicus. Now, ein is a copular verb. He was. So whatever he was has to be called a predicate nominative, even though it's an adjective here, right? So bear that in mind. An adjective can function substantively or attributively. In this case, it's acting as the predicate nominative. Chalipon gar mala ein. Okay, chalipon means difficult. It could be a masculine accusative singular. It could be a neuter accusative singular or a neuter nominative singular. Gar is the only thing it can ever be is a sentence adverb at the beginning of a sentence. For. Mala means very, and mala usually is attached to another adverb. Okay, it's a way of making a superlative. The same way we can say fastest or very fast. They do the very fast version with mala. And then we have, again, this copular verb ein. Now, the only thing that could be a nominative is chalipon if it's a neuter. So a difficult thing. For it was a difficult thing. That sounds perfectly feasible to me. What do you do with the mala? Well, you use it to modify the adjective difficult. So here, it was a very difficult thing. So it, the subject, is assumed from the verb, and the context would probably give it to us. Chalipon then is going to be a neuter nominative singular, the predicate nominative of the copular verb, and mala is an adverb modifying that adjective. Okay? So we get, it was very difficult. So what we saw here, especially, is he was near, or it was near Cyzicus. This is an example of adverbs not acting as adverbs. All the rest of the adverbs I gave you, the adverbs were labeled relation adverb, but you can also use adverbs for other things. So we can use an adverb to function as an attribute or a subject or an object or a pronoun, right? We just saw that it was the pronoun. It was near. we see a lot in phrases like the men then did this and the men now do that, where then and now are adverbs, but they're modifying the men. Um, and so they're not being used to modify verbs or adjectives or anything else. They're being used to modify nouns, which grammarians in English will say you can't do, but we do it all the time. So, for example, hoi prosthon tois nun strategois elegon. Elegon is your verb, clearly, right? Lego, which means to speak. So they spoke. Hoi, they spoke. You speak to someone in the dative. Tois, strategois. So they spoke to the generals, right? Except it's not just hoi, it's hoi prosthen. And prosthen, remember, pro means before. Prosthen is before the adverb, right? Pro is the preposition before. So the ones beforehand, the ones earlier, you could say, spoke to the generals, the ones now. And so here you have a case of two adverbs. In the one case, we have a subject or a noun that it is modifying. The general's now, the general's currently in office is what that means. So the adverb is acting as an attribute of strategois. In this case, we have no subject stated, and so the guys before acts as the subject. Now, there's a bit of a debate whether the article should be the subject and the adverb an attribute, but if that adverb had been an adjective, it would have been acting substantively as a subject. So I'm treating the adverb the same way. It's being treated substantively, the ones before. Okay, the same thing is going on here. Tois entha epaisen. Epaisen means to persuade, okay? And you persuade people in the dative. So he persuaded tois, those men. Which men? The ones there, entha, okay? Konona, oh, sorry, that should be an apostrophe deck, ton oikothen hylon. So they took Conan. Conan in the nominative doesn't have an alpha on the end. We know that's an accusative. So they took Conan from the ones, oikothen means from home. So they chose Conan from the ones from home. In this case, from home is an adverb, and it's acting like an adverb in the sentence, but not because it's actually acting in place of a noun, right? It's the object of a preposition in this case. It just the prepositional phrase happens to be an ek that acts adverbally anyway. So I hope you get a good feel for these adverbs, and frankly, we do a lot of the shortcuts in English that they do in Greek, and so I don't think you'll find that much trouble. I have given you a handout of the common irregular ones that you can keep by you if you want, but you always have your analyzer to help you figure out what things are.